The silver judgment seal was already descending toward Eloan's name when she pressed one trembling hand over her hidden child. Eloan Vale. Alpha King Valdemar's voice carried through the royal hall, deep enough to silence every whisper beneath the vaulted stone ceiling. She raised her eyes to him. He sat above the court in black royal armor, broad shoulders framed by heavy fur, his crimson cloak spilling beside the throne like a dark river. Once, she had believed that face could never frighten her. Once, when no one was watching, those same gray eyes had softened at the sight of her. Tonight, they held nothing she could trust. Step forward. Eloan obeyed. Hundreds watched the lowborn Omega cross the polished floor alone. 3 days earlier, the royal council had accused her of betraying the crown. A sealed message bearing her mark had been discovered among documents belonging to the king's enemies. She had denied writing it. She had begged for the original registry to be examined. No one had listened. And Valdemar had not come to her chambers once. That silence had hurt more than the accusations. Eloan stopped before the throne and forced herself not to touch her stomach again. No one knew. Not the council. Not the women who had whispered that an Omega like her had reached too far above her station. Not even Valdemar. She had discovered the truth only that morning, when the palace healer quietly confirmed what her changing body had already begun to tell her. She carried the Alpha King's child. For one desperate hour, the knowledge had felt like hope. Then a frightened kitchen maid had slipped into her room with a warning. The council did not merely intend to disgrace Eloan. Before dawn, they meant to remove her from the palace permanently, whether Valdemar condemned her or not. Someone needed her unable to speak. Someone was afraid of what she might prove. "Did you send the message?" Valdemar asked. Eloan stared at him. She could tell him about the child now. The entire court would hear it. He would have to stop the judgment. But then their baby would become another piece on the council's board, another reason to control her, another secret someone might decide was dangerous. "No," she said. A council lord rose. "The seal says otherwise." "A seal can be stolen." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Valdemar's jaw tightened. "And you have evidence?" There it was, the question that broke something inside her. Not because it was cruel, but because he needed proof before he could believe her. Eloan slowly shook her head. Valdemar looked away for half a second. To everyone else, it meant nothing. To her, it was an answer. She understood then that staying would not save her. Neither would revealing the child. If she wanted her baby to survive whatever had begun inside this palace, she would have to choose before someone else chose for her. The king lifted his hand, preparing to speak. "The court will recess until midnight. At that hour, I will deliver judgment." Eloan bowed. She did not plead. She did not look at him again. She returned to her chamber under guard, waited until the corridor changed watch, then removed the pale blue court dress they would recognize and pulled on the plain sage green wool gown she had worn before the palace ever knew her name. From beneath a loose floorboard, she took 3 things: a few coins, her mother's small silver pendant, and the healer's folded confirmation. She hesitated over the last one, then tucked it close to her heart. Eloan did not know who had forged her seal. She did not know why someone wanted her silenced. But she knew one thing with terrifying certainty. By midnight, the court would gather to hear what Alpha King Valdemar had decided to do with her. And by midnight, the woman carrying his unborn child would be gone. Eloan was halfway through the servants' passage when the palace bells began calling everyone back to judgment. Midnight had come sooner than she expected. She tightened her plain cloak around the sage green gown and kept moving, one hand protecting the healer's folded confirmation beneath the fabric. The narrow corridor smelled of old stone and lamp oil, a forgotten artery running beneath the royal wing. Years ago, before anyone at court had noticed her, Eloan had carried linens through these passages. Tonight, being remembered as insignificant might be the only advantage she had left. At the final stairwell, she found the kitchen maid waiting with a covered basket. Mara's face had gone pale. "The western gate is being watched," she whispered. "But something about the order frightened me," Mara whispered. "They doubled the guards at every public gate, yet pulled 2 men away from the lower servants' corridor. It makes no sense. The council ordered it before the king returned to the hall. Aloan stopped. Before his judgment? Mara nodded. That single fact settled coldly inside her. Someone had prepared for her disappearance before Valdemar had condemned her. Whoever had forged the message was not waiting for justice. They were controlling what happened around it. Then I will not use the gate. Mara stared at her. There is nowhere else. There is the old mill road. That tunnel was sealed years ago. Aloan remembered carrying winter stores through it as a girl. The palace end was sealed. She took the basket. The river end was not. Mara caught her wrist. If you leave now, everyone will believe you are guilty. Aloan looked toward the ceiling as another bell sounded above them. Somewhere beyond layers of stone, Valdemar would be returning to his throne. For one painful moment, she imagined walking into that hall, placing the healer's paper in his hand, and watching disbelief become wonder. She wanted him to know. She wanted their child to be welcomed rather than hidden beneath a frightened woman's cloak. But wanting something did not make it safe. If I stay, Aloan said softly, someone else decides what happens to my child. Mara's grip loosened. Child. Aloan immediately regretted saying it, but Mara's shock became something gentler. She looked at Aloan's stomach, then back into her eyes. Does the king know? No, will you tell him? Aloan swallowed. When I know telling him will not endanger her. She did not know why she said her. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps hope. Mara opened the concealed door behind the pantry shelves. Then go. Aloan entered darkness carrying only the basket, a lantern, and the life she had chosen to protect. Above her, the royal court assembled. Valdemar returned to the throne expecting to see Aloan standing before him. Instead, her place remained empty. A guard approached and whispered into his ear. The Alpha King went completely still. Say that again. Her chamber is empty, Your Majesty. Counselors began murmuring. One called her flight proof of guilt. Valdemar did not answer. His gaze dropped to the silver judgment seal before him, and for the first time that night, uncertainty replaced anger. He had spent the recess reviewing the evidence himself. One detail had refused to fit. The date impressed beneath Aloan's supposed seal belonged to a registry that had been replaced months earlier. Someone had forged evidence using an outdated royal record. He had returned intending not to condemn her, but to stop the judgment and investigate. Now she was gone. Close the roads, he ordered. Then he paused. If she believed he had already decided against her, soldiers chasing her would only confirm everything she feared. His next words came lower. No one is to harm or frighten her. She is to be brought back safely. Beneath the palace, unaware that the king had finally questioned the evidence, Aloan reached the river opening. She stepped into the night and did not look back until the towers were nearly a mile behind her. One hand rested over the hidden proof of her pregnancy. The other closed around her mother's silver pendant. She had entered the palace as an Omega who believed being loved by a king might make her safe. She left understanding that safety could not depend on whether a powerful man believed her quickly enough. Before sunrise, Aloan crossed beyond the royal boundary. By noon, the search parties would find only an abandoned cloak beside the river road. And when Valdemar eventually learned what else had vanished from his kingdom that night, finding Aloan would no longer be the only thing haunting him. 5 years later, Aloan heard her daughter laughing beneath an apple tree and knew the life she had protected was about to change. Mama, look. Lyra stood on her toes with both hands stretched toward a branch several inches beyond her reach, her long honey-brown hair shining in the afternoon light. I can get it myself. Aloan smiled despite the familiar ache those words created. Lyra wanted to do everything herself. Climb fences. Carry baskets too heavy for her small arms. Ask questions adults preferred not to answer. At 5 years old, she already possessed a stubborn dignity that Aloan recognized far too well. Then I suppose the apple has met a determined opponent. Lyra frowned seriously at the branch. A moment later, her gray eyes flashed with concentration, and the apple dropped neatly into her waiting hands without her touching it. Aloan's smile disappeared. Lyra stared at the fruit. I did it again. Inside, Eloan said quietly. Her daughter obeyed immediately. That frightened Eloan more than the strange display itself. They had lived peacefully in the small northern village of Briar Glen for nearly 5 years. Eloan worked as a healer and seamstress, accepted no charity, and owed allegiance to no court. She had built their life one ordinary day at a time until ordinary had become precious. But Lyra was growing, and the blood she carried was beginning to answer questions Eloan had spent years avoiding. Inside their cottage, Eloan knelt before her daughter. "You remember what we discussed?" Lyra nodded. "I do not show anyone when strange things happen. Not because you should be ashamed. Because people might misunderstand." Eloan touched her cheek. "Exactly." Lyra studied her with those unmistakable gray eyes. "Did my father do strange things when he was little?" The question landed softly and hurt anyway. Eloan had never told Lyra that her father was a king. She had never called Valdemar cruel, either. A child deserved truth when she could carry it, not bitterness inherited from someone else. "I did not know him when he was little." "But you knew him." "Yes." "Did he know me?" Eloan hesitated. "He never had the chance." Before Lyra could ask more, hoofbeats sounded outside. Eloan rose immediately. 3 royal riders had stopped near the village square, crimson insignias visible against their dark cloaks. 5 years vanished from Eloan's body in a single heartbeat. She was beneath the palace again, carrying a lantern through darkness, protecting a secret no one could be allowed to take from her. But she was not that frightened woman anymore. She opened the cottage door and walked toward the square before fear could make the decision for her. The riders were not searching houses. They were posting a royal notice. A border settlement 30 miles east had suffered a fever outbreak, and the crown was requesting healers from surrounding villages. Eloan read the notice twice. Then she saw the signature beneath it. Valdemar. Even after 5 years, she knew the shape of his name. Beside her, an elderly neighbor sighed. "They say the king himself is traveling north because the sickness reached families under royal protection." Eloan's fingers tightened around her skirt. She could stay hidden. She had done it successfully for years. But people were ill, and she possessed skills they needed. More importantly, hiding had slowly become another kind of cage. That evening, Lyra found her packing medicines into a leather case. "Are we leaving?" "For a little while." "Because people need you?" Eloan looked at her daughter and nodded. Lyra considered this, then placed her treasured wooden wolf into the travel bag. "Then they need us." 2 days later, mother and daughter joined a merchant wagon heading east. Eloan told herself the northern territories were vast. One royal procession could pass miles away without their paths ever crossing. Yet near sunset on the 3rd day, the wagon reached a stone bridge blocked by mounted royal guards. Beyond them stood a line of black banners edged in crimson. Eloan stopped breathing. At the center of the road, beside a massive dark horse, stood a tall man in black royal armor and a heavy fur cloak. His hair had grown longer. His face looked harder than memory, marked by 5 years of authority and something that resembled exhaustion. Alpha King Valdemar turned toward the approaching wagon. Eloan could still have lowered her face. She could have hidden behind the canvas covering. Instead, she remained seated beside her daughter. She had promised herself that fear would never choose Lyra's life again. Valdemar's gaze passed over the travelers, stopped on Eloan, and went utterly still. 5 years of absence seemed to collapse between them. Then Lyra leaned around her mother to see why the wagon had stopped. The king looked at the little girl. He saw the honey-brown hair first, then her age, then the gray eyes that mirrored his own. Eloan watched recognition fail to become certainty on his face, because the truth was still too impossible for him to name. Lyra looked from the silent king to her mother. "Mama," she whispered, "why is that man staring at me?" Valdemar took one step toward the wagon, and Eloan moved between the Alpha King and her daughter. The motion was instinctive, but its meaning struck him harder than any accusation could have. 5 years ago, she had once crossed crowded rooms simply to stand nearer to him. Now she looked at him as someone from whom a child might need protection. Eloan. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice, as though he had forbidden himself from saying it for too long. She descended from the wagon without lowering her eyes. Your Majesty. The title created a distance that had never existed between them before. Valdemar noticed it. So did the guards. You are alive. Eloan's expression tightened. Were you told otherwise? Your cloak was found beside the river. I left it there so no one would follow me. His gaze shifted toward Lyra. And her. Eloan became very still. Her name is Lyra. Valdemar waited, but Eloan offered nothing more. He could command answers from generals and counselors. He could silence a royal hall by lifting one hand. Yet on that narrow northern road, facing the woman he had failed to believe quickly enough, his authority suddenly seemed useless. Lyra climbed down carefully and stood beside her mother. She studied Valdemar with open curiosity. Are you really a king? One guard inhaled sharply at her casual tone. Valdemar barely noticed. I am. Lyra considered his black armor, crimson cloak, and sword. You look uncomfortable. Eloan closed her eyes briefly. Something almost human softened Valdemar's face. Sometimes I am. Lyra nodded as though this confirmed an important theory. Then she noticed the royal wolf engraved on his gauntlet. Her attention fixed on it. Without warning, the metal emblem gave a faint silver shimmer. Valdemar had seen the royal silver answer only to bloodbound magic and authenticated crown seals. Never to a child who had not been formally recognized. Valdemar froze. Eloan immediately took Lyra's hand. The light disappeared. We came because Briar Glen received your request for healers, Eloan said. There are sick families east of here. If you intend to question me, it can wait until they are treated. It was not a request. Valdemar looked at the woman before him and understood another painful difference. The Eloan he remembered had always searched his face before making difficult choices, as though his approval could steady her. This Eloan had already decided what mattered. Agreed, he said. Several hours later, the temporary infirmary inside an old monastery was crowded with frightened families. Eloan worked without hesitation. She organized clean water, separated patients by symptoms, and corrected an exhausted royal physician who had overlooked contamination in one of the storage barrels. Valdemar watched from the doorway as people began listening to her not because she carried a title, but because she knew what to do. When a council aide muttered that an unregistered Omega should not be issuing instructions to royal staff, Valdemar turned toward him. She identified what my physicians missed. The aide lowered his head. Your Majesty, I only meant, then means something useful. Eloan heard him. She did not thank him. Strangely, Valdemar seemed to understand why. His defense could not repay 5 years. Near midnight, the fever finally broke in the youngest patient. Relief moved through the infirmary. Eloan stepped outside, exhausted, and found Lyra asleep beneath a blanket near the monastery hearth. Valdemar was sitting several feet away, his sword resting untouched beside him. He had not approached the child. He had simply remained where Eloan could see him. You suspect something, she said. Valdemar stood. I know her age. Many children are 5. I know her eyes. Eloan's pulse quickened. Many people have gray eyes. The royal crest responded to her. Silence stretched between them. Valdemar could have demanded the truth. Instead, he asked the one question Eloan had not prepared herself to hear. May I ask who her father is? She looked at Lyra, then back at him. You may ask. His face hardened with restrained emotion. And will you answer? Not tonight. Valdemar's jaw tightened, but he nodded. That small acceptance unsettled her more than anger would have. Then he reached inside his cloak and removed a worn piece of pale blue fabric. Eloan recognized it instantly. It had been torn from the court dress she discarded the night she escaped. I kept this, he said. For 5 years, I believed I had failed to find you before something happened. Eloan stared at the faded cloth. You did fail to find me. Yes. He did not defend himself. But I never stopped looking. Before Eloan could answer, Lyra stirred behind them. Her sleepy voice crossed the room with innocent clarity. Mama? Eloan turned. Lyra rubbed her eyes and looked directly at Valdemar. Is he the man you said never got the chance to know me? Lyra's question left no room for another careful answer. Elowen crossed to her daughter and knelt beside the blanket. Valdemar remained several feet away, motionless beneath the monastery lamps. Yes, Elowen said softly. Lyra looked at him again. Then he is my father? Elowen had imagined this moment in 100 different ways over 5 years. None had included a fever-stricken monastery, exhausted healers sleeping nearby, or Valdemar standing before them with a scrap of her old dress hidden inside his cloak. She took Lyra's hands. Yes. Valdemar closed his eyes for a single breath. When he opened them, the Alpha King was still there, but something behind the crown had broken open. Lyra is my daughter? She is. His gaze dropped to the child. Wonder came first. Then grief. Lyra studied him with the solemn concentration she gave unfamiliar herbs. Did you know about me? Valdemar looked at Elowen before answering. No, why? This time Elowen answered. Because I left before he knew. Lyra frowned. Were you afraid of him? The question cut through every title between them. Elowen refused to give her daughter a comforting lie. I was afraid of what was happening around him, and I did not trust that he would believe me soon enough to keep us safe. Valdemar absorbed every word without interruption. Your mother had reason to feel that way, he said. Elowen looked sharply at him. 5 years ago, he might have explained the evidence, the council, the investigation he had begun too late. Tonight, he offered no defense. Lyra seemed less interested in blame than adults would have been. So you did not leave because you did not want me, she asked him. Valdemar's expression changed. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, stopping far enough away that Lyra could choose whether to approach. I did not know you existed. If I had known, I would have wanted to know you from your first day. Lyra looked at Elowen for permission. Elowen gave a small nod. Only then did the child step closer. I can make apples fall without touching them. Valdemar almost smiled. That explains the crust. Mama says I should not show people. Your mother is right. Can you do it? Not with apples. Lyra considered that disappointing answer. What can you do? Perhaps I can show you someday, if your mother agrees. The words mattered. He had not said when I take you home. He had not called Lyra princess. He had not claimed rights over her because of blood. He had placed the choice where Elowen needed it to remain. Lyra yawned, climbed back beneath her blanket, and within minutes exhaustion carried her to sleep. Valdemar waited until her breathing settled. You could have told me, he said quietly. Elowen rose. And you could have believed me before I had proof. He flinched, but she continued. I discovered I was carrying her the morning of the judgment. Hours later, I learned someone intended to silence me before dawn. I had no evidence, no protection I trusted, and a child whose existence could become leverage the moment the court knew. I found the flaw in the forged record during the recess. After you asked me to prove my innocence. Yes. He did not soften the admission. I was too late. Elowen looked toward Lyra. 5 years too late. Valdemar reached inside his armor and withdrew something other than the faded cloth, a small folded document, worn at its edges. Then perhaps this is 5 years too late as well. He handed it to her. It bore the royal seal and a date from the morning after her disappearance. Elowen read the first lines and stopped. The judgment against her had never been issued. Instead, Valdemar had suspended the council's authority over her case and ordered an investigation into falsified royal evidence. Why did no one tell the kingdom? She asked. Because the investigation was obstructed. Records disappeared. Witnesses changed their statements. By the time I understood that your accusation was part of something larger, you had vanished beyond every search I could make without exposing you to whoever had wanted you gone. Elowen looked down at the document. It did not erase the night she fled. It did not return Lyra's first steps or first words to him. But it changed one belief she had carried for 5 years. Valdemar had not condemned her. He had failed her differently, and that difference mattered even if forgiveness did not follow. There is more, he said. The seal used on that forged message appeared again 6 months ago. Elowen's attention snapped back to him. Where? On a document authorizing the transfer of royal medicine away from the northern settlements. The fever. The missing supplies. The reason Valdemar himself had traveled north. Elowen slowly understood why the past had found them here. Someone is still using the same network. Yes. Voldemar looked toward their sleeping daughter. And now that Lyra has been seen with me, whoever feared the truth 5 years ago may realize exactly who returned with you. Elowen folded the royal document and made the first decision of her return before Voldemar could make it for her. Then we find out who is behind it. His gaze sharpened. Elowen, if they know Lyra is my daughter, that is exactly why I am not disappearing again. 5 years earlier, fear had forced her into darkness with an unborn child and 3 possessions beneath her cloak. She would not pretend that choice had been wrong. It had saved Lyra. But survival had taught her something else. Hiding could protect a child for a season, not forever. Lyra deserved a life that did not depend on keeping her own blood secret. Voldemar studied her for a long moment. What do you need? Not what will you obey. Not where will I send you. The question loosened something small and guarded inside her. The medicine records. Before sunrise, Voldemar ordered every supply ledger brought to the monastery. Elowen sat beside the royal physician and compared shipments against the villages reporting fever. The pattern emerged slowly. Medicine had not vanished randomly. Crates intended for settlements along the northern river had repeatedly been redirected through an abandoned royal storehouse. Elowen traced one entry with her finger. This authorization date. Voldemar leaned closer without touching her. What about it? It is the same week the old palace registry was replaced. He understood immediately. Whoever had framed her 5 years ago had needed access to obsolete seals and administrative records. The stolen medicine suggested that access had never disappeared. A royal clerk named Osric was summoned from the traveling staff. He arrived nervous, but cooperative and produced older transport books that had escaped the recent alterations because they were considered worthless duplicates. Elowen opened one and felt her pulse change. A symbol appeared beside several transfers, a small crescent crossed by 3 vertical lines. She reached beneath her gown and removed her mother's silver pendant. The same symbol was engraved faintly on its back. Voldemar stared at it. How long have you had that? My entire life. Who gave it to you? My mother. She told me never to sell it, even if I had nothing else. Elowen expected another question, but Lyra entered with one of the village healers, carrying breakfast and her wooden wolf. The moment she approached the table, Voldemar's royal crest shimmered again. This time, the pendant in Elowen's hand answered with the same silver light. Everyone fell silent. Elowen immediately closed her fingers around it. What does that mean? Voldemar did not pretend to know. I intend to find out. Osric had gone pale. Elowen noticed. You recognize it. The clerk looked toward Voldemar, then Elowen. The symbol belonged to the old royal wardens. They protected succession records before the current council system existed. His eyes returned to the pendant. The old wardens did not trust ink alone. Their seals were bound to answer authentic royal records and expose copies altered after registration. The crown abandoned the system generations ago, but the oldest archives still carry its mark. Elowen's stomach tightened. Why would my mother carry it? I do not know. Osric hesitated. But records bearing that mark were removed from the palace archive shortly before your judgment. The past shifted beneath Elowen's feet again. Her accusation had not begun with one forged message. Someone had been removing records before she was ever brought before the court. Voldemar ordered Osric to say nothing outside the room. Then he turned to Elowen. I can take you and Lyra somewhere guarded. No, I am not ordering you. I know. That was why her answer came without anger. But if we vanish again, whoever is watching learns that we are afraid. We continue treating the villages. Quietly investigate the records. Lyra stays with me unless I decide otherwise. Voldemar nodded. Agreed. Lyra looked between them. Do kings always have to agree with Mama? For the first time, Elowen saw genuine amusement reach his eyes. Wise kings learn when they should. She almost smiled, and the almost mattered. Later that morning, another shipment arrived. This one contained enough uncontaminated medicine for every patient at the monastery. Voldemar had personally redirected supplies from the royal household stores. No ceremony accompanied it. No one announced his sacrifice. He simply made sure the families received what they needed. Aloan watched him carry one of the crates inside with his own guards, and an old belief became harder to hold in its original shape. He was still the man who had failed her. But perhaps he was no longer the man who would make that failure the same way. Near sunset, Osric returned with one final discovery. Hidden beneath the false transfer orders was an original inventory sheet from 5 years earlier. Aloan recognized the date immediately, the night of her judgment. One item had been removed from the royal archive only hours before she fled. It was not a military record or council decree. It was a sealed genealogy register bearing the old warden symbol. Beside the removal authorization was the name of the council lord who had first presented the forged evidence against her. The name beside the missing genealogy register belonged to Lord Cedric, the same counselor who had called Aloan a traitor 5 years ago. Aloan stared at the faded ink until the monastery around her seemed to disappear. She remembered Cedric standing beneath the royal banners that night, holding the forged message as though it were undeniable truth. She remembered how quickly he had demanded judgment. Now she finally understood that her accusation had not been the beginning of his plan. It had been a consequence of something he feared she might discover. "Where is he now?" she asked. Valdemar's expression hardened. "At the capital. He still holds a council seat. After 5 years? I could prove records had been manipulated, but never who ordered it. Cedric survived every investigation by making certain someone else appeared responsible." Aloan looked at the old inventory again. "Then we do not accuse him yet." Valdemar studied her. "What are you proposing?" "We give him a reason to reveal what he wants." She touched her mother's pendant. "He removed a genealogy register before framing me. He has been redirecting medicine through the same administrative network. Whatever he was protecting 5 years ago still matters now." Valdemar's first instinct was visible in the tension across his shoulders. He wanted distance between Aloan and danger. But he did not turn that instinct into an order. "What reason?" "Send word that the missing register has been recovered." Osric looked alarmed. "But it has not. Cedric does not know that." Aloan met Valdemar's eyes. "Say it will be presented before the royal court in 7 days." Silence followed. Then Valdemar nodded. "We control who carries the message." By the following morning, the false announcement was traveling south with a trusted royal courier. Aloan expected days of waiting. Cedric answered before sunset. A sealed instruction arrived at the Northern Supply Office ordering all archive transport materials transferred immediately to the capital for destruction due to supposed contamination. He had reacted exactly as Aloan hoped. More importantly, he had signed the order using his private council cipher. Osric compared it against the authorization that had removed the genealogy register 5 years earlier. The marks matched. For the first time, Aloan possessed evidence created by Cedric's own decision, not merely evidence left behind by someone working beneath him. Valdemar read both documents, then looked at her. "You were right. 5 years earlier, those words would have meant everything. Now they meant something different. Not rescue. Recognition." "We still need the register," she said. "Yes." A search of the abandoned royal storehouse began that evening under Aloan's condition that no public accusation be made until the evidence could survive scrutiny. Behind a false inventory wall, the guards found a locked iron chest containing discarded seals, altered transport ledgers, and documents removed from the palace archives. Osric quickly understood why they had survived. The old seals and original records were not relics Cedric had forgotten to destroy. They were the reference tools that allowed his network to keep producing convincing authorizations without creating contradictions in the royal archives. The genealogy register was among them. Valdemar did not open it alone. He brought it to Aloan. The old warden symbol covered its leather binding. When she placed her pendant beside it, the silver markings answered one another. Osric carefully turned the brittle pages until he found the final protected entry. Aloan read her mother's name. Beneath it was a notation explaining that her family had served for generations as hereditary keepers of royal succession records, entrusted with an independent seal specifically designed to expose alterations to bloodline documents. Aloan was not a hidden princess. She was not secretly noble. The truth was stranger and, somehow, more meaningful. Her mother had belonged to a line whose duty was to protect the truth from the crown itself when necessary. Cedric had feared Aloan not because she possessed a throne, but because the pendant she inherited could authenticate records he had spent years falsifying. "He thought I knew," Aloan whispered. "That is why he framed me." Valdemar's face went still with realization. "And I gave his accusation legitimacy by doubting you publicly." Aloan did not spare him. "Yes." He lowered his eyes. "Then my failure was part of his weapon." The admission carried no demand for forgiveness. That mattered more than an apology designed to end discomfort. Across the room, Lyra had been drawing beside the hearth. She approached quietly and slipped her small hand into Aloan's. "Does this mean we can go home now?" Aloan looked down at her. Briar Glen had become home because Aloan had built safety there. The capital was the place she had escaped. Yet if Cedric remained protected by silence, Lyra would inherit the consequences. "Not yet," she said. "First, we finish what brought us back." Valdemar did not say our kingdom needs you. He did not say you belong beside me. He simply asked, how? Aloan closed the recovered register. "The same place where they once waited to hear you judge me." Understanding entered his eyes. "The royal court. Cedric wanted everyone to see me condemned there." Her voice remained calm. "Now everyone will see the evidence there." Valdemar glanced toward Lyra, then back to Aloan. "And our daughter? She does not become proof for anyone. She does not become a symbol unless she chooses that life when she is old enough to understand it." Agreed. It came without hesitation. Aloan held his gaze, recognizing another small change she could no longer dismiss. 5 years ago, the court had decided what she was before she could defend herself. This time, she would enter that hall carrying evidence, choosing her own words, with the king standing beside the truth rather than above it. And somewhere hundreds of miles south, Lord Cedric had just received word that the woman he had once frightened into disappearing was coming back to the place where his lie had begun. The royal hall fell silent when Aloan entered through the same doors she had once believed she would never see again. 5 years earlier, she had crossed that floor alone while hundreds waited for Alpha King Valdemar to decide whether she was guilty. Now she walked by her own choice, wearing a simple sage-green gown, her mother's silver pendant visible at her throat. Valdemar entered separately and took his place before the throne, but he did not summon Aloan to stand beneath him. At her request, a plain table had been placed in the center of the court. Upon it rested the recovered genealogy register, the old transport ledgers, the forged seal, and Cedric's recent destruction order. Lord Cedric rose slowly among the counselors. His composure almost made Aloan admire him. "Your Majesty, surely this spectacle is unnecessary." "Then the evidence should make that clear," Valdemar replied. Cedric's gaze moved to Aloan. "A woman who fled judgment returns after 5 years carrying accusations against the council." Convenient. The old humiliation tried to return with his words. Aloan felt it, acknowledged it, and refused to let it choose her response. "I fled because someone intended to silence me before the king delivered any judgment." An accusation without proof. It was. Aloan placed Cedric's recent order beside the 5-year-old archive authorization. "This is not." Osric stepped forward and explained the matching private cipher. The royal archivist confirmed that the recovered seals had been removed illegally. The physician presented records showing medicine diverted from northern settlements through the same administrative network. Each fact narrowed the space around Cedric until denial required increasingly impossible explanations. Still, he smiled. "Administrative irregularities do not prove that Lady Aloan was innocent of treason." Valdemar stood. "She was never convicted of treason." A murmur swept through the court. Cedric's expression finally changed. Valdemar descended from the throne carrying the document Aloan had first seen at the monastery. On the morning after her disappearance, I suspended the proceedings because the evidence presented against her contained an obsolete registry mark. I should have recognized the flaw before she ever stood here. He faced the court rather than alone. I did not. My failure allowed a false accusation to carry the authority of my crown. Alohan's throat tightened. This was not the private regret of a man asking to be forgiven. He was placing responsibility where everyone who had witnessed her humiliation could hear it. Alohan Vale was failed by this court, he continued, and she was failed by me. No one whispered now. Cedric suddenly reached for the genealogy register. That book proves nothing. Alohan placed her hand over it first. Then you will not object to authenticating it. She removed her pendant. The archivist brought forward the disputed records recovered from the storehouse. When the pendant touched the old warden seal, silver light traveled across the authentic register. It remained dark against Cedric's altered copies. The court erupted in startled voices. Cedric stared at the pendant. Your mother should have surrendered that years ago. Alohan went still. Valdemar's eyes sharpened. Cedric seemed to realize his mistake too late. You knew my mother had it, Alohan said. He said nothing. That is why you removed the genealogy register before accusing me. You believed she had taught me how to authenticate the records. Cedric's silence answered more clearly than denial. The recovered documents completed what his reaction had exposed. He had falsified succession and property records for years, using altered registrations to strengthen loyal council families and conceal unauthorized transfers. When Alohan arrived at court wearing the pendant, he feared the old warden line had returned to expose him. So he created a traitor before she could become a witness. Valdemar ordered Cedric stripped of council authority and placed under lawful royal custody pending a full public inquiry. No spectacle of vengeance followed. There was only the quiet collapse of power once protected by secrecy. Then Valdemar did something Alohan had not expected. Before the assembled court, he stepped away from the throne and faced her at equal height. Alohan Vale, this crown publicly recognizes that the accusation against you is false. Your name is cleared without condition. She looked around the hall that had lived inside her memory for 5 years. She had imagined returning angry. She had imagined demanding that everyone regret what they had believed. Instead, what she felt was release. I accept the correction, she said. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But truth had finally been spoken where the lie had once been strongest. A small movement near the rear doors caught Valdemar's attention. Lyra stood there with Mara, who had traveled from the north with the healers. Alohan had kept her daughter away from the hearing until the evidence was secure. Now Lyra looked uncertainly toward her parents. Valdemar did not announce her. He did not use the moment to strengthen his throne. He looked at Alohan and waited. The choice was hers. Alohan held out her hand. Lyra crossed the hall and took it. Then, after a moment, she reached her other hand toward Valdemar. The Alpha King stared at those tiny fingers as though they offered something greater than a kingdom. He looked once more to Alohan. She nodded. Valdemar took his daughter's hand. For the first time, the court saw them together. Yet Alohan understood that public recognition was not the end of what had been broken. Justice could restore her name. It could not restore 5 lost years. And when Valdemar quietly asked whether she and Lyra would remain at the palace after the inquiry, Alohan knew the most important judgment was no longer his to make. Alohan gave Valdemar her answer the next morning, not in the throne room, but in the quiet garden where Lyra was teaching herself to whistle. We will stay for 30 days, she said. Valdemar looked at her carefully. 30 days. Lyra deserves time to know you without a court deciding what that relationship should mean. After that, she and I decide where home is. 5 years earlier, the Alpha King might have heard the limit as rejection. Now he simply nodded. Then I will make those 30 days worthy of her trust. Alohan noticed that he said her trust, not yours. And he kept his word. He did not bury Lyra beneath royal tutors or announce titles she could not understand. He learned that she disliked boiled carrots, loved stories about explorers, and asked questions precisely when adults hoped she would not. He showed her the royal stables only after Alohan agreed. When Lyra asked why everyone bowed to him, He explained responsibility before power. When she accidentally made 3 apples tumble from a palace tree, he caught only one and let the other 2 roll into the grass. Lyra laughed until she could barely breathe. Aloan watched from beneath the archway, feeling something more difficult than anger begin to grow inside her. Grief for what they had lost. The public inquiry continued meanwhile. Cedric's records exposed years of manipulated property transfers and stolen supplies. Families harmed by those decisions had their claims restored through open hearings, and Valdemar dissolved the council office that had allowed sealed accusations to proceed without independent review. More importantly to Aloan, he restored the old Warden Archive as an institution independent of the throne. He offered its leadership to her. "Because of my mother?" she asked. "Because you protected the truth when the crown did not." Aloan accepted, but on her own terms. The archive would serve every Pacan village, not merely the palace, and its records could not be sealed by a king without independent review. Valdemar agreed to every condition. On the 30th day, Aloan packed a small travel bag. Valdemar found her beside the same palace corridor from which she had once escaped. For an instant, old fear crossed his face. "Are you leaving?" "Briar Glen is still our home." He lowered his gaze. "I understand." "I did not say we were leaving forever." Valdemar looked up. Aloan stepped closer, though she left enough space between them for the choice to remain visible. "I cannot become the woman who trusted you before that night. She is gone." Pain moved through his expression, but he accepted it. "I know. And I do not want her back." Aloan glanced toward the courtyard, where Lyra was waiting beside a carriage with her wooden wolf tucked beneath one arm. "The woman I became knows that love without trust is not safety. She knows being chosen by a king does not determine her worth. Then I will never ask you to become less than her." For the first time in 5 years, Aloan believed him without needing proof in her hand. "Good," she said softly. "Because if there is anything between us again, we begin from here. Not from what we were." Valdemar did not reach for her. "From here." 3 months later, he arrived in Briar Glen without a royal procession. Lyra spotted him first and raced down the cottage path shouting, "Papa, you are late." The words stopped him where he stood. Aloan watched his face change before Lyra threw her arms around him. He knelt and held her carefully, closing his eyes as though receiving something he had never believed he deserved. He had spent 5 years searching for a vanished woman. He had needed only months to understand that finding her was not the same as earning a place in her life. In the year that followed, Valdemar divided his time between the capital and Briar Glen. Aloan expanded the Warden Archive throughout the Northern Territories. Lyra learned what it meant to carry royal blood without being taught that blood made her more valuable than anyone else. And when Aloan eventually returned to the palace, she did not return because a king commanded it, because a bond demanded it, or because the court finally approved of her. She returned because she chose the man Valdemar had worked to become. On the anniversary of the judgment that never happened, they stood together in the royal hall after everyone else had gone. Valdemar looked toward the place where she had once waited to be condemned. "If I could change that night, you cannot." Aloan took his hand. "Neither can I." He looked at their joined fingers. "Then what do we do with it?" Aloan thought of a frightened Omega escaping beneath the palace, an unborn daughter beneath her heart, believing disappearance was the only choice she had left. Then she thought of Lyra laughing in the courtyard beyond the doors, completely certain that both her parents would come when she called. "We make sure what happened to us becomes the reason it never happens to someone else." Valdemar lifted her hand gently to his heart. This time, Aloan did not feel chosen by the Alpha King. She felt something far more precious. She felt free enough to choose him.